Okay, so before I start off with the class, I had put a message in the group regarding internship Global Foundries. So they do have internship opportunities not only in analog but also in memories and digital, and I think they have some RF related work as well. So as of now, I think I got only two CVs from the whole class. So if others are interested, please send me by tonight. Okay. So tomorrow I want to mail him the CVs. So the way this works is that they will conduct interviews, and I don't know what all, how many rounds of interview, but whatever it is, and they'll shortlist maybe one or two candidates, and they will offer you an internship, probably starting from July. Okay, so that will be for a period of 1 year. So your entire final year project will be done with them, and that will be counted towards your MTech thesis. And if you do well, and if they are impressed with your work, usually they end up converting the internship to a full-time offer. So this is pretty much almost like your recruitment, and this is also the time when many companies will be looking for interns. So if you guys are really interested, so the way I like this to be done is that you guys should get in touch with the placement office person, Mr. Venu, and he has a list of companies, uh, include all kinds of companies. Basically, if you are interested, let's say in digital, you can basically request him to send a mail to that particular company, or if you are interested in the analog. So I mean, it need not be very formal, but then we can have multiple ways of doing it. Now, these internships are the primary way in which many of these companies hire freshers. Otherwise, they probably take some BTechs from IITs or some MTechs from top IITs only, these companies. So, what I would like you to do is, so depending on what your individual interests are, see, some of you might be looking at higher studies or PhD, things like that. So, in that case, do project in the institute has much more value. But if some of you are looking for a job immediately after your MTech, and if you want to go into this VLSI field, you can basically, pick and choose your company. Not that all of them do hire intern, but some of them do, some of them don't, and they have a very strict interview. Okay, so as far as if you are applying for, let's say, some analog position, analog or mixed signal or RF position, then you will have to prepare very well with your basics. So usually they test you on the basics. Okay, for analog it is this RLC circuits, right? Let me turn on video. Yeah. So for analog, it's usually this RLC circuit, step response, frequency response, that kind of stuff. So usually, even in places like IIT Bangalore or the top IITs, people usually students do a lot of preparation. Okay. Unfortunately, I have not seen that level of preparation in IAS here, and that's one of the reasons why, even though companies do come sometimes for internships or recruitment, people don't get through. Okay, and usually they check your basics, be it digital or be it analog. Uh, you should be very thorough with the basics. Digital, again, the basics, the logical effort, electrical effort, things like that. Propagation delay, setup hold times. If they give you different, questions related to that, you'll be in a position to answer those things. Okay, so there are a lot of resources online, and you really do need to, um, prepare very hard for these interviews, because usually these are taken by highly experienced people. Okay, and they will have some 10 years, 15 years of experience in the industry, and they expect you to know all the basics, and also MOSFETs and basic MOSFET circuits, the basic common source, that type of amplifiers, and the basic concepts, noise and other things. If you know these things, that is what they expect. The other complicated things, they know that they can teach you. If you know the basics, they know that they can teach you the rest of it. All right. So for any interview, be it any company, get your basics ready. In fact, for digital, you should be able to understand the relationship between, supply voltage, frequency of operation, this dynamic voltage scaling, frequency scaling, all those basic concepts. Okay, and of course some Verilog, VHDL, different people look at different things. So prepare well, take it seriously, start your preparation from now on. That would be my advice. You guys can have group preparation or individual preparation, however you want to do it, you do it. But let me tell you, even MTech students who are in the best of the institutes in the country, they literally burn the midnight oil for their preparations for all these interviews. Okay, so which means that definitely all of you guys also need to burn the midnight oil, work hard for your preparing, brush up your basics, and once you're good, the industry is looking for really good people. If you're good, obviously they will take you. Okay, either this company or the other, someone will really take you if you're pretty good. If you're not good, then they will not really take you. So that's the thing. All right. So I have got 2 CVs as of now. So others, if you are interested in this internship, it has both digital, analog, memories, and all that. You can also indicate what you are actually interested in, and send it to me by this evening. Tomorrow I'll be consolidating those CVs and sending it to Global Founders. Okay. All right. So with that, let me start the class. Just give me a minute.
Sir, what is the time period we are having for the preparation?
Yeah, just a minute. So you were asking for the time period of preparation in the sense, like,
Yeah,
okay, when is the interview going to be conducted? I don't know. Okay. So that is entirely in the hands of the industry. But start preparing from now on, so that whenever the interviews come, it can be in March, it can be in April. Okay. So because they'll be interviewing candidates from across India, so you'll have to be ready for that. Just give me a minute. Hello. Dearly, I'm teaching a class, dear love. Is there anything important, urgent? Okay, bye. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, we really don't know. So it depends on the industry. Whenever they want to conduct the interview, they will be conducting. Okay, so we really can't say this time and so on. Okay, all
okay.
right. But this is season basically. Up to June or July. Of course, different companies, they have their own business related issues and things like that. So their requirements and so on. Okay. But your job is to just get ready and be prepared, so that whenever they schedule an interview, you should be ready to attend. Okay. All right. So
Sir,
let's get started. Yeah.
sir, if someone gets a company for
Yeah.
internship,
Mm.
so will he able to apply for another company if he's interested?
I think that may not be possible. See, typically these are fairly good companies. So what you're saying is, like, if you sit for Global Foundries and then you get Intel, you want to jump to Intel and you
Yeah.
want to apply for Intel also. Uh, Typically, I think for placements we don't allow that. Okay, for internship as of now, I don't think there is any specific rule, but I don't know. I mean, in the interest of your classmates, you might, you know, not apply. But as of now, for internship, the placement cell by itself doesn't have a rule. But for placements, we do have a rule like that.
Okay.
Yeah, unless it is going to have a much higher pay and things like that, we don't allow a student to sit through another company. Okay, but my suggestion is, these are all good companies. The pay scale once you join the company will also be quite similar. Okay, and like, I mean, these are definitely some of the top companies in the world in this field. So, and you will be working with not only your Indian colleagues, you'll also be working with your foreign colleagues and so on. So it will be good if you get an offer, accept it, and go for it. Okay. Let the others get chance for the next company and so on. Okay. And again, there is no guarantee that the next company will definitely come. So all these things are there. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's get started. So today I want to wrap up our discussion on switched capacitor circuits. If you recall, so I just want to touch upon one particular issue. Let me just call it as the implementation issues in switched capacitor circuits. Okay. Now, let me take this example. Like we have, of course, let's say this is VCM. Right. So this is one of the things this can also be, I mean, this is one of, the non-inverting amplifier that we talked about, right? And you also have right? So this is your VN, and then you have something going to ground or VCM. Let me just put as, VCM. So let's say this is phi 1, this is phi 2, and let's say this is also phi 1. So here what happens is, this capacitor, let's say C1 and C2. So this is what we saw. We can also look at the track and hold, circuit with the flip around track and hold, right? So you charge it in one way and then you go and put it the other way. All these things are there, right? That circuit is something like this, right? So let's say this is phi 1 when it is reading, and this becomes phi 2. Okay, let's say this is C3. Now, the question is, how do you implement these capacitors C1 and C2? Till now, we talked about them as just capacitors, right? So let's say you take a value of 1 picofarad or 500 femtofarad, something like that. How will you implement? Any ideas? So we looked at on-chip capacitors in the last semester, right? So what are the three types of on-chip capacitors you have?
MOS,
MOS.
MM, and M1.
Correct. So you have MOS capacitors, you have MOM, MOM, and MIM, right? Okay. Now for the C1 or C2 or C3, which capacitors or which capacitors can you use? Can you use MOS capacitor? Typically no, because the MOS capacitor is basically what? MOSFET, where this is connected to ground, right? So if you have a capacitor to ground, you can always use a MOS capacitor, all right? Because the drain and the source are connected to a fixed terminal, right? And this usually when you use an NMOS or a NMOS transistor, the drain and the source are connected to the substrate, to the ground, right? The bulk is also connected to the substrate. Or if you use a PMOS transistor, you can connect it from some capacitor to VDD, right? So you have both things. Either you connect it to VDD, okay, VDD to some node, or ground to some node, or VDD to ground. Okay, VDD to ground, you usually use what is called as bypass capacitors or supply decoupling capacitors. So we will look at the necessity for this. So all these three can be used MOM. You get very good density. Sorry, MOS. But for a series capacitor like C1 or C2, where both terminals are connected to a non-zero potential, it is not possible to use a MOS capacitor. Okay, and again, the other thing is, like here, MOS capacitor is also quite non-linear, which means the capacitance changes with voltage. So the value of C1 and C2 itself, if it becomes a function of voltage, then all the precision amplification and other things that we talked about, even sample and hold and all that, just goes for a toss, right? So because we talk about, charge redistribution, and we depend on the ratio of the capacitances and so on, right? So you don't want that to happen. And again, first of all, you can't use a MOS capacitor between two non-zero potentials. So you have to use only MOM or MIM. Okay. Now MOM structure we already saw last semester, right? It is an interdigitated finger type structure. And MIM capacitor is where you have a metal insulator and a metal at some of the higher layers, right? So this is interdigitated. That is, you have, something like this, right? Now, if you look at the capacitor in detail, right, you can refer to the lecture notes in the previous semester also. Now, this type of a structure is formed, let's say, in metal 1, the bottommost metal layer, and then you stack it up, metal 1, metal 2, metal 3, and so on, right? You stack it up so that you increase the effective area, so that the capacitance per unit area then increases, right? Now, what happens is, from metal 1 to substrate, there will be some parasitic capacitance, correct? Because imagine this. So the cross section is like this. This is your p-type substrate, right? Here you have, this is the cross sectional view, right? So here you have this, and then behind this you have the other one, right? So you have, let's say, this is plate A and this is plate B, okay? And if you see the perspective view, you will probably have something like this. I'm just doing a very rough diagram. Oops, it's really bad. Right? Something like this. Let's say this is, plate A and plate B, right? But you have the substrate underneath. So this metal will form some capacitance to the substrate, because substrate anyway will be grounded. So you will have some parasitic capacitance Cp1 and Cp2, okay, for both plates of the capacitor, okay. Now if you take any PDK offered by one of the foundries, there are two types. You can have a symmetric MOM, or you can also have an asymmetric MOM, okay. So what does it actually mean? It basically means that if Cp1 is equal to Cp2, it is the symmetric MOM, all right. And if Cp1 or Cp2 is not equal to if one of them is greater and the other one is smaller, so usually they will do, something there, they'll put a plate on one side and the other side will not have a capacitance. So Cp2 will be much, much, much smaller than Cp1, okay. Something like that will happen. Typically, let's say Cp1 is, or rather much greater than Cp2. So this becomes an asymmetric MOM, all right. So this is the parasitic capacitance. The capacitance is fine. It's only the parasitic capacitance to the ground. So the model of the capacitor now becomes, let's say this is the CMOM, and you have Cp1, Cp2 to ground. Basically, these are the two terminals of your capacitor. This is the model of your actual capacitor. Same way, if you take a look at the MIM cap, what happens if I draw the perspective view? It's something like this. So this is the MIM top, and you have the MIM, let's say this is the high K dielectric, and then you have the small, you have the MIM bottom. Okay. And let's say substrate is way over here, all right. So now here what will happen? This bottom plate of the MIM capacitor will have some parasitic capacitance to ground, whereas the top plate will not have any parasitic capacitance to ground, because it's anyway not, you might have very minimal because of the routing extensions and so on, but by and large, to a first order, you don't have a parasitic capacitance to ground. So this can be drawn as, let's say this is your Cmim. If this is your top plate, there is a bottom plate capacitance to ground. Okay. And even your asymmetric MOM, if it is really, let's say this is for, let's say, symmetric. Asymmetric can be also thought of as, let's say, one side alone you have CP1 and CP2 is very small that you can even neglect, kind of thing. Okay, this is how it happens. Now, why are we looking at all these things? Okay, let's redraw our circuit here. Right, this is our capacitor, right? Now for C1 and C2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the parasitics here. Okay. Now what will happen? Now basically you have some problem, correct? If you call this node as X, right? In last class we talked about, this node X, right, has some capacitance, right? This is from the C input of the op amp. Now in addition to the input of the op amp, what else you have? You have CP1 from C1, and you also have CP1 of C2, right? Now all these capacitors are getting loaded at the node X, okay? And what did we find in the analysis that we did in last class? We saw that the node effective capacitance at this node X needs to be minimized as possible, okay? Which is why when you design an op amp, the amount of capacitance that you have at the input also matters, right? Especially for this switched capacitor circuits. And we know that because of the finite gain of this op amp, this Vx will not be equal to Vcm, or in that case we said it's grounded. Okay, Vcm and ground are like kind of understood to be equivalent, right? If you have a single supply, it is Vcm. If you have a bipolar supply, then it will be at ground. Okay. Now, what happens is, because of that, there will be some voltage potential. There will be some charge stored on this Cx. This whole thing together becomes Cx, and this, what does it do? It reduces your accuracy. Correct. This is what we concluded in last class. So, which is why many times people prefer to use a capacitor which is either asymmetric, or you use a MIM capacitor. Okay, because MOM capacitor, symmetric MOM capacitor, is going to have capacitance on both sides, and that is not a good idea. So if you instead of doing this, if you say, okay, I will use a MIM capacitor or an asymmetric MOM capacitor, and if I put my parasitic capacitance side to the left hand side, then what happens? I am eliminating the problem in C1, right? Same way, if I eliminate this CP1 here and put the parasitic capacitance only on the right hand side, then what happens? I am basically eliminating the problem at X, or rather reducing the magnitude of the problem. Okay, so if you use a MIM capacitor, especially a little older technology nodes, people heavily used MIM rather than MOM and other things. Okay, so the concept of bottom plate and top plate of the capacitor was very much there. Now you tell me which will be the bottom plate of C1 and which will be the top plate of C1. Come on, guys. For C1,
top plate will be at X node.
Yeah. So this will be the top plate and this will be the bottom plate, right? And same way for C2, which is the top plate, which is the bottom plate?
Same at X node, top
Left
plate.
side top.
And yeah. Okay. So this type of design is also called as bottom plate sampling. Now, we have encountered this term a few classes back, okay, which means something different. To prevent charge injection, you open up the bottom plate of the capacitor before, you opening out the other thing, right? So that is called as bottom plate sampling. But unfortunately or fortunately, we end up with the same name for a totally different thing. Here what happens is, whenever you sample something, you sample it on the bottom plate of your capacitor. Okay, a good example is basically this, right? In other words, the general principle is like this. Okay, the driven node side is the bottom plate, or rather driven side should be the bottom plate. What is the driven side? That is, if some external thing is driving it, okay, or charging it, that plate should be the bottom plate. So if you see here, CP1 is there, but its effect is really not there, right? Because Vn will charge both CP1 and C1. Okay, so the current to charge CP1 is coming from Vn itself. Okay, we are not having extra current through C1. Okay, same way, if you look at the capacitor C2, that CP2 is getting charged by the op amp. The op amp will drive CP2 as well as C2, right? So that is the reason why you always use the driven side. You drive the bottom plate of the capacitor. Okay, so in other words, if you are using even asymmetric MOS, you put the capacitor, you put the plate or put the side which has less capacitance to the sensitive node X, and the driven node can have larger parasitic capacitance. This is what is called as bottom plate sampling. This is also called as bottom plate sampling. Although the same name is used, there are two different things. Okay, is this clear? Okay, that's why in some of the papers or even the textbooks, you will see that one particular plate will have a darker shade and then the other. That is basically to make sure that this is not affecting. All right, okay. Now let us move to one more topic, which is basically switched capacitor, resistor, and we'll talk about switched capacitor integrator. Okay, with this we will close our topic on switched capacitor circuits. Next class onwards, I will start teaching ADC fundamentals, basically the ADC and DAC fundamentals, quantization, and so on. Okay, all right. Now consider this circuit that I'm going to draw. All right. Let's say this is driven by phi 1, this is driven by phi 2, this is some capacitor C. Let's say this terminal voltage is V1, this terminal voltage is V2. Okay. Now phi 1 and phi 2 are non-overlapping clock signals. Okay. Now in fact, if you look at any of these phases, we talked about phi 1 here, phi 2 here, all these signals typically in all these switched capacitor circuits, the phases will be non-overlapping. Okay, that's a very major thing, because if they are slightly overlapping, even if their transition regions are overlapping, what will happen? It will form a short, right? So for example, let's say phi 1 and phi 2 are kind of slightly overlapping. Okay, let me say phi 1 is like this, and if phi 2 is also, let's say even the transition regions are overlapping, what will happen in this region? Phi 1 is connected, phi 2 is connected, this phi 1 is connected. So what will happen? The charge from this capacitor will just escape through this short circuited switch to the output of the op amp, right, in the small duration. So finally what will get charged on to C2 will be very minimal. Same thing in a track and hold. you will lose the charge because there are overlapping switch on position. The transition region is a very kind of an iffy region, right? There is still some current flow happening through the switch, and you can very well lose some amount of charge in that transition region, which is why for all the switch capacitor circuits, non-overlapping clocks are very much needed. So that means that phi 1 will be something like this, and phi 2 will be something like this. Even the transition regions will not overlap, and you'll basically have some dead time. Okay, this is what is called as dead time. You will have some dead time between the phases of the clock. Okay, so we will also look at on circuit, if possible today, about how you can generate non-overlapping clock cycles. Okay, clock phases. Okay, all right. Now coming back to this particular circuit. Now phi 1, when let's say this is switch 1, this is switch 2. Okay, when switch 1 is on, what will happen? C gets charged to V1. So the amount of charge that is deposited is C times V1, right? Now when S2 is on, obviously S1 is off, right? Let's say at V2 node there is some capacitance. Let me just denote it saying that there will be some load capacitance. Okay. Now what happens is, what will happen when switch 2 is on? There will be some charge which is transferred, right? Let's say it takes a voltage of V2 eventually. So the amount of charge that is stored now is basically Q2, which is equal to C times V2, right? Now, if this process gets repeated, right, what is happening over a period of time? I mean, for every clock cycle, not even over a period of time, for every clock cycle, what is happening here? There is some amount of charge which is being transferred from this node V1 to this other node V2, right? So what is that amount of charge that is transferred here? Let me say Q transferred is nothing but Q1 minus Q2, right? So in one, if you kind of compute its average, you can say that the average current that is flowing through this circuit, okay, can be given as what? Q1 minus Q2, that's the charge per unit time, let's say divided by T. T is nothing but 1 over F clock, okay, the clock frequency of this particular thing, right? So in other words, basically what is happening here is the average current that is being, that is flowing out, right, is equal to charge 1 Q1 minus Q2 divided by T. In other words, average current can be written as what? C times V1 minus V2 divided by T. Okay. This can be written as what? V1 minus V2 divided by some notional resistance, which is the resistance of this switched capacitor circuit. Okay. By Ohm's law, we know that V by R is I, right? So what is this RSC, switched capacitor resistor? It is given by T over C, or in other words, 1 by C times F clock. Okay. Now this is what is called as a switched capacitor resistor. Okay. You are building a resistor without using a physical resistor. You only have two switches and a capacitor, but if you switch it at a certain rate, okay, and also there is another thing, right? The variation of V1 and V2 is also much smaller than the clock frequency. So typically around 10 times difference is needed. Okay. So let's say V1 is changing at a rate of, let's say, 1 kilohertz or something, and if your clock frequency is some 20 kilohertz, you can easily get a resistor. And the reason that this is a very attractive thing is that by adjusting the value of the clock frequency and the capacitor, you can get extremely very high values of R. Okay. So let's look at a simple example. So this is what is called as a switch capacitor circuit, and this is equivalent to a resistor or SC. Okay. So as long as your input signal is at a much lower frequency than the clock signal, this can work as a switch capacitor resistor. Okay. Now let's look at one thing, like let's say if you want an RC circuit where the RC time constant is, let's say, 1 millisecond. Okay. Right. Now let's say
Sir, Bhuvan had some
capacitor.
query.
Yeah.
So the F clock is a phi 1 or phi 2, or is it the same?
Okay, both are, it's the same, no? So phi 1 and phi 2 are non-overlapping clock phases of the same frequency, right? So what is the frequency definition here? Basically, you look at the time period, right? This is going to be your T. Both are the same, both will have the same time period, right? It's only that they are shifted in phase and have a smaller duty cycle. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So here, let's say your capacitor is 1 picofarad. Okay, because we know that on chip you cannot have very large resistors or very large capacitors, right? You will only be wasting a lot of area. So let's say we have a capacitor of 1 picofarad, which is fairly reasonable to implement on chip. Now, how much would you need for R? If you want a RC product of 1 millisecond, right? How much will you need? You'll need 1e minus 3, right? Or 10 power minus 3 divided by 10 power minus 12. You'll have 10 power minus 9. Correct? So you need a 1 giga ohm of resistance. Correct? You need a resistance of 1 giga ohm, which is literally impossible to implement on chip. Okay. Now, this resistor can be implemented as a switch capacitor resistor. Okay. So as long as your signals are moving very slowly, okay, let's say this is C2, this is phi 1, this is phi 2, okay, and let's say if you use this circuit, this is basically your resistor portion, right, and this is your capacitor. Okay, this is your C2. Okay, now what is RC2? RC2 is nothing but 1 divided by C1 F clock into C2. In other words, this depends on C2 by C1 ratio into 1 over F clock. Okay. So let's say you take, so usually what happens is on the same wafer, when you fabricate capacitors, there will be variation, but as I mentioned in the previous class, capacitor ratios are much more well behaved. Okay. So even if the capacitor absolute value varies by around 20% across the same wafer, right, the capacitor ratio will be still, the variation will be kind of less than 1% or something. Okay. So the capacitor ratios are much better controlled. So if you take C1, okay, or rather, let's say, so in this case, let me say C1 is taken to be 1 picofarad. Then if you take F clock to be, let's say, some 100 kilohertz, okay, what will be the value of C2 that you need? Basically, it is 1 e power minus 3, 1 millisecond into 1 pico into 100K, right, is C2, right? So this is minus 3 and minus 12, minus 15. This is minus 13, and then you have another. So this is 100K, right? So this is 10 power 5. So you basically have 100 picofarad. Right? So the area that is consumed by this, especially if you implement this with some MOS cap or something, right, is much smaller than what you would need to implement a resistor of 1 mega ohm or 1 kilo. If you have 100 picofarad, this will become, let's say, for the same, if C is 100 picofarad, then the R required will become 10 mega ohm. Okay. a 10 mega ohm resistor will occupy a very huge area. Okay, and it will have so much of parasitic capacitance to ground that it becomes pretty much useless. Okay. So this is what is called as a switched capacitor resistor. But of course, here you can obviously see that there will be some parasitic capacitance at this node, right? So the accuracy of this thing is limited by the parasitic capacitances at all these different nodes, right? So which is why people use, typically this is used in switched capacitor integrators, okay, especially when you talk about delta sigma modulators or other things, you use a lot of integrators, okay. So analog integrators, or rather these switched capacitor integrators. So what is an integrator? In a continuous time domain, you'll have something like this, right? Let's say this is VCM minus Vin, you have some R, you have some capacitor, right? This is an integrator circuit that all of us have studied even in our analog electronics. Okay. Now what are we going to do? We are going to replace this R with the switched capacitor circuit, and there is a technique which is used to kind of take care of this parasitic problem also. Okay. So the circuit looks something like this. This is your, let's say, phi 1, and then you have phi 2. Okay. You have your capacitor, right? Oh, sorry. Okay. Wait, let me. This is a little different circuit. Here the capacitor comes in series, let's say C1, okay, and here you have two more transistors, okay, and these both are connected to VCM, and this is going to your okay. Now this portion is basically your R, okay, or your switched capacitor resistor. Now what happens? Okay, I didn't put the phases fully, right? This is phi 1, phi 2. Okay. Now what happens in phi 1 is basically, let's say this is Vin. In phi 1 phase, what happens? Vin is connected to this capacitor C1. Phi 2 is off. This is connected. This is connected to VCM. Okay. So this plate of the capacitor is VCM. The other plate is Vin. So this is how it's charged, and the charge in the capacitor, or the voltage across the capacitor, is nothing but Vin minus VCM. Okay. Correct. In phi 2, what happens? Phi 2, this switch, let's call it switch S1, S2, S3 and S4. Okay. So S3 and S2 are now on, right? Now this plate of the capacitor becomes VCM, and this plate is connected to the op amp, right? And now this node will also be in VCM because of the negative feedback action, right? So usually there will be a resistor on in parallel such that it provides DC feedback. Okay, so this particular node will also be at VCM, right, because of the negative feedback thing, right? And so what will happen, that Vn minus VCM charge, because this plate earlier was charged to VCM, earlier charged to Vn, now it is brought down to VCM. So that extra charge will basically go and sit like this. Okay, and basically you will get the integrated version of Vn, right? Okay, so or rather you basically, if you charge it for a certain amount of time, it will basically be the integration of Vn minus VCM over a certain region of time. Now that integrated value is basically pushed into this capacitor. All right. So this is the operation. Now, why is it that we say that this is insensitive to parasitics? Let's say there is some parasitic CP1. This is another parasitic capacitor CP2. Now what happens? Both CP1 and CP2 are always driven, right? So when phi 1 is on, CP2 is driven by switch S4, okay, and CP1 is driven by switch S1, and in the other case, S3 is driving CP1 and the op amp is basically through S2 is driving CP2. So CP1 and CP2 are always driven. So as long as they are properly driven, their effect is nullified. Alright. So a more realistic switch capacitor inductor integrator will be something like this, right? So this will go to VCM. On top of this, you have a capacitor C2. You will also have a very large resistor here. Now this resistor will also be implemented as what? A switch capacitor circuit. Okay, same switch capacitor topology. This is VCM, right? And here you basically have your resistor here, right? So this is C1. Oops. This is V in, this is phi 1, this is phi 2, this is phi 1, this is connected to VCM, right? And this is phi 2, correct? This is C1, this is C2, let's say this is C3. Now what happens to these other switches? This is basically operating in the other phase of the clock. So this will be phi 1, this will be phi 2, this will be phi 1, and this will be phi 2, correct? This is a switched capacitor resistor, and this is also a switched capacitor resistor. Sometimes people might have something like this is what we are basically implementing. Okay, so let's say this is switched capacitor resistor 1, resistor 2, okay, and this is the way that you can implement. Now you can also have adding, summing integrators and things like that, and which will by adding things at this inverting terminal. Okay, is this clear? Okay, so using a switched capacitor resistor, you can build switched capacitor integrators where the effect of the parasitics are all taken care of. All right. Now all this material I have taken from a book called as CMOS Circuit Design, Layout and Simulation. There are simulation. This is by Jacob Baker. Okay. So actually this book has there are two parts kind of. The second one is called as Mixed Signal Circuit Design. So some of the material you will see in this book and some of the material in the other book. So you will also see this in Razavi and so on. Okay, so in case you want to refer, you can always do that. All right. Okay. Now finally, before I close the class, I want to look at non-overlapping clock generation. Okay. So all the circuits that we have seen till now, as I explained some time back, they have to be non-overlapping. Okay, the clock phases have to be non-overlapping. In case you start having overlapping phases, or if you have even the transition regions overlapping, you are going to have a lot of problems, right? You lose your accuracy, and if you are trying to build some high resolution, highly accurate, precise ADC, the whole thing goes for a toss, right? So you need to have signals which are basically looking like this. If this is phi 1, phi 2 should look something like and so on. Okay. Now how to generate these things? Okay. So if you have a signal phi which is going in, so I will give you the circuit. Now I will leave it to you to understand the circuit. It's a very simple digital circuit. Okay, but I want you to draw the waveforms and plot as in like using your logic, you draw the waveform and then convince yourself that indeed that is what you will basically get. Okay. Now it is a very simple circuit. You have two NAND gates. Okay, you have there are other versions of the circuit also, so this is not the only version. Okay, you have a cross-coupled NAND gate. Okay, sometimes, and you basically have a bunch of inverters. All right. Now, if phi is like this, a normal clock waveform, okay, so I want you to plot phi 1 and phi 2. Take it as a homework, okay. So what you will need to do is basically to plot the voltage at this node, this node, this node, okay, and then you will be able to figure out how it is basically happening. Okay. Now, in order to increase the dead time, what you can do is increasing. So you can also use a NOR gate. There are NOR gate based implementations and so on. There are different ways of doing it. Okay, you can take anything that you want. So you can add a bunch of inverters in the feedback path. Okay, and then you take this. Okay, now what will happen is this one path will basically be like this, and the other path will be like this. You just put an inverter, you will basically get it. Okay, so if you put an inverter and take it, these two nodes will be non-overlapping clock phases. Okay, so maybe I'll just remove one inverter here. Yeah, so if you have unequal number of, one has odd and the other has even number of inverters, you'll be able to generate this kind of thing. So with this, what will happen is you will basically get like this correct waveform. You will basically get. Okay. Yeah. All right. So you can please work out this particular circuit. Okay. Trace the path and then see how you are basically, if you can assume some propagation delay here, TPD1, and then you have some TPD inverter, okay, for each of these inverters, and then you can calculate. You will basically see that you are able to generate. Okay? A very simple circuit to generate non-overlapping clock waveforms. Okay. So any doubts, any questions so far?
Sir,
Yeah.
here the dead time is we are getting it because of the last buffer, right? Last
The
inverter.
dead time you are getting because of these inverters and the propagation delay of this. So what happens is when this goes high, let me just quickly, I'll just give you the thing. If this goes high, this will kind of go down after some period of time. This will go up after some time. This will go up after some time. So only when this node changes, then this inverter will start changing. Correct. So you can, this NAND output will start changing. So there is TPD 1, 2, and then 3. So that is basically going to form the dead time. And of course, you'll have the other two inverters also coming into the picture. Okay. So which is why I want you to work out, give a rising edge of the clock and a falling edge of the clock, and then see how things are working. All right. So trace it. So assume there is a propagation delay for each of these elements. Okay. Increasing that time, put more inverters within the feedback point. That's it.
Oh, okay, sir.
Yeah. So trace it. I want all of you to plot each of the nodes and then be able to convince yourself that this is working. Take it as a homework.
Sir, in pen and paper or any tool?
Pen and paper.
Okay.
Yeah, tool, if you put it, will automatically give you. Yeah, so using pen and paper, try to just use your logic, see what happens, and you can do it. Okay. All right. So with this, we'll wind up class, and maybe another 5 minutes start the other class.